When my grandmother passed away last spring, I thought the worst part was saying goodbye. I was wrong. The worst part came when my mother-in-law opened the jewelry box my grandmother had left me and discovered something that would tear our family apart. What happened next taught me that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who will fight hardest to take away what's rightfully yours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rachel, and this is the story of how a beautiful mahogany jewelry box became the catalyst for the most difficult period of my life, and ultimately, the key to discovering my own strength. If you've ever felt like you had to prove your worth to your own family, or if you've ever been made to feel guilty for receiving something you truly deserved, then this story is for you. The morning frost was just beginning to melt on the windows of my grandmother Eleanor's Victorian house when I received the call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday in early April, and I was rushing around my kitchen in Cedar Falls, Minnesota, trying to get ready for work when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my cousin Marcus's number, and I knew before I even answered that the news wouldn't be good. Eleanor Thompson had passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87. Despite her advanced age and declining health over the past year, the finality of it hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor wasn't just my grandmother. She was my confidant, my supporter, and the one person in my extended family who had always made me feel completely accepted and loved. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, still holding the phone long after Marcus had hung up, trying to process a world without Eleanor's warm voice calling me every Sunday evening to check in. For the past 6 years of my marriage to David, those weekly calls had been my anchor. Eleanor had a way of making me feel seen and valued that I desperately needed, especially during the more challenging moments with David's family. The Hartwells were what you might call Cedar Falls royalty. David's father had built a successful insurance company that bore the family name, and his mother, Patricia, held court in the wealthy Meadowbrook district with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. They lived in a sprawling colonial house with perfectly manicured gardens, hosted charity events at the country club, and moved through town with the easy assurance that came from generations of social prominence. I, on the other hand, had grown up on the other side of town in a modest ranch house, where my mother worked as a nurse and my father managed a small hardware store. When David and I met during our senior year at the University of Minnesota, those differences hadn't seemed to matter. Love, we thought, could bridge any gap between our backgrounds. Eleanor had been the exception in David's family. From the moment David brought me home for the first time, she had embraced me without reservation. While Patricia maintained a polite but distant demeanor, and David's sister Stephanie treated me with the kind of cool politeness reserved for acquaintances rather than family, Eleanor had pulled me aside that very first visit and told me how happy she was that David had found someone who clearly made him smile. Over the years, as I struggled to find my footing in the Hartwell family dynamics, Eleanor became my safe harbor. She would invite me over for tea when Patricia's subtle criticisms became too much to bear, and she always remembered the small details about my life that others seemed to forget. When I got promoted at the Cedar Falls Community Center, where I worked as a program coordinator, Eleanor was the first to call with congratulations. When David and I struggled with infertility, she was the one who held my hand and assured me that my worth as a woman had nothing to do with my ability to have children. Eleanor had also shared stories with me that she seemed to tell no one else. Stories about her first marriage to a wealthy businessman named Charles Pemberton, who had died tragically young in a car accident, leaving her with more money than she knew what to do with, and a collection of jewelry that had been in his family for generations. She spoke about her second marriage to David's grandfather, Robert Hartwell, and how different that relationship had been. Robert had been kind but practical, and their marriage had been built on companionship rather than passion. But it was during our quiet afternoons together that Eleanor would bring out her most treasured possession, an ornate mahogany jewelry box that sat on her bedroom dresser like a miniature cathedral. The box itself was a work of art, with intricate carved roses along the sides and a brass lock that gleamed despite its age. Eleanor would open it carefully, her arthritic fingers gentle with the delicate mechanism, and show me pieces that seemed to glow with their own inner light. There was a pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother, simple but luminous against the faded velvet lining, a pair of diamond earrings that Robert had given her for their 10th anniversary, modest but elegant, And then there were the pieces from her first marriage. An emerald necklace that caught the light like captured forest shadows, matching earrings that seemed to hold the depth of deep water, and a brooch shaped like a butterfly with wings that seemed to flutter even when perfectly still. Eleanor would tell me the story behind each piece, her voice taking on a dreamy quality as she remembered the occasions when she had worn them. The emerald necklace had been her first mother-in-law's pride and joy, worn to important social events and passed down through 3 generations of Pemberton women. The pearl necklace had been her own mother's wedding gift to her, a symbol of the simple elegance that had defined her childhood. Each piece carried not just monetary value, but emotional significance that connected Eleanor to the women who had come before her. During one particularly memorable afternoon, about a year before she passed away, Eleanor had looked at me with those sharp blue eyes that age had never dimmed and made a statement that I didn't fully understand at the time. "Rachel," she had said, closing the jewelry box with deliberate care, "I want you to know that this box and everything in it will be yours someday. Not because you married into this family, but because you're the only person who has ever looked at these pieces and asked about the women who owned them before me." I had protested, of course. The jewelry was clearly valuable, and I assumed it would go to Patricia or Stephanie, who were blood relatives. But Eleanor had waved away my concerns with the same gentle firmness she used when she was absolutely certain about something. "Blood doesn't make family, dear. Love does. And you've shown me more genuine love and interest in the past few years than some people have shown me in decades." Now, sitting in my kitchen with the news of her death still fresh, I realized that those afternoons with Eleanor had been preparing me for something I hadn't expected. Not just grief, but inheritance. Not just loss, but responsibility. The funeral arrangements consumed the next week of my life. Patricia, true to form, took charge of most of the planning, consulting with Eleanor's longtime pastor and the funeral director, with the efficiency of someone accustomed to organizing large events. I found myself relegated to smaller tasks, contacting Eleanor's bridge club friends, arranging flowers, and helping to sort through some of her personal belongings. It was during this sorting process that I truly began to understand the scope of Eleanor's life and interests. Her bedroom contained not just the jewelry box I remembered, but filing cabinets filled with meticulously organized documents. There were folders containing the complete history of each piece of jewelry, including original purchase receipts, insurance appraisals, and even black and white photographs of previous owners wearing the pieces at various social events. Eleanor had been a historian of her own life, documenting everything with the precision of a trained archivist. I found letters she had written but never sent, diary entries that revealed the depth of her thoughts and feelings, and research she had conducted into the provenance of various family heirlooms. The woman I had known as my gentle, storytelling grandmother had also been a scholar, preserving the history of objects and relationships with careful attention to detail. The most surprising discovery came when I found a folder labeled, "For Rachel," in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. Inside were copies of all the jewelry documentation, along with a handwritten note that made my heart race. "My dearest granddaughter," the note began, and I had to sit down on Eleanor's bed to continue reading.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're probably feeling overwhelmed by everything that's happening. I want you to know that every decision I've made about my belongings has been carefully considered, and none more carefully than my decision about the jewelry box. The note continued for several pages, explaining Eleanor's reasoning for leaving me the jewelry collection. She wrote about watching me during our afternoons together, noting how I always asked about the stories behind each piece rather than focusing on their monetary value. She described her frustration with other family members who seemed more interested in the prestige of owning valuable items than in understanding their emotional significance. "I've watched Patricia look at these pieces with calculating eyes," Eleanor had written, measuring their worth in dollars rather than memories. "I've seen Stephanie admire them for their ability to impress others rather than for their connection to the women who wore them with love and pride. But you, my dear Rachel, have always understood that the true value of these pieces lies in the stories they carry and the love they represent. The note concluded with instructions that both comforted and worried me. Eleanor had been very specific about her wishes, but she had also included warnings about potential family reactions. "I know this decision may not be popular with everyone," she had written. "The Hartwell family has certain expectations about inheritance and bloodlines that don't always align with what I believe to be right and fair. But I trust you to stand up for yourself if anyone questions my decision. You're stronger than you know, Rachel, and I believe in your ability to honor these pieces properly." Reading Eleanor's words in her empty bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of her careful planning and deep affection, I felt a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Eleanor had seen something in me that I wasn't sure I saw in myself, and she had entrusted me with something that clearly meant the world to her. But her warnings about family reactions made me wonder what kind of conflicts might be ahead. The reading of the will took place the following Tuesday in the offices of Crawford, Martinez and Associates, the law firm that had handled the Hartwell family's legal affairs for decades. Mr. James Crawford, the senior partner, was a distinguished man in his 60s who had known Eleanor for most of her adult life. His office was lined with law books and family photographs, creating an atmosphere of both formality and warmth. The gathering included David and me, Patricia and her husband, Robert Sr., Stephanie and her husband, Mark, and several of Eleanor's longtime friends who had been named as beneficiaries of smaller bequests. The atmosphere was appropriately solemn, with everyone dressed in dark colors and speaking in hushed tones. Mr. Crawford began by reading the standard legal language that opened Eleanor's will, establishing her mental competency and the validity of the document. Then he moved on to the specific bequests, which were both generous and thoughtful. Eleanor had left money to several charities she had supported throughout her life, including the Cedar Falls Historical Society and a scholarship fund for young women pursuing education in nursing, a profession she had always admired. Personal items were distributed among family members and friends, with careful consideration for each person's interests and needs. Patricia received Eleanor's collection of antique books and her writing desk, items that reflected her love of literature and organization. Stephanie inherited Eleanor's china and crystal, perfect for someone who loved to entertain. David received his grandfather's watch collection and some family photographs that held particular significance. Then Mr. Crawford reached the portion of the will that would change everything. "To my beloved granddaughter, Rachel Thompson Hartwell," he read, his voice carrying the formality of legal documentation, "who has shown me more genuine love and understanding than I could have hoped for. I leave my mahogany jewelry box and all of its contents. This includes, but is not limited to, the Pemberton Emerald Collection, my mother's pearl necklace, my diamond earrings, and all other jewelry and personal items contained within the box at the time of my death." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the ticking of the antique clock on Mr. Crawford's desk. I felt heat rising in my cheeks as every eye in the room turned toward me. David reached over and squeezed my hand, but his touch felt uncertain rather than supportive. Patricia was the first to break the silence, her voice carefully controlled but carrying an undertone of shock. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? Eleanor left her jewelry to Rachel?" Mr. Crawford nodded, consulting the document in front of him. "Yes, that's correct. The mahogany jewelry box and all of its contents." "All of it?" Stephanie's voice was higher than usual, and she was looking at her mother rather than at me. "According to the will, yes. All jewelry and personal items contained within the box." Patricia's composure, which I had always admired and sometimes envied, seemed to crack slightly around the edges. "Mr. Crawford, I'm sure this is just an oversight. Eleanor probably didn't realize how valuable some of those pieces are. The Emerald Collection alone must be worth—" "Mrs. Hartwell," Mr. Crawford interrupted gently but firmly, "I can assure you that Eleanor was completely aware of the value of everything she was bequeathing. She asked me specifically to have the jewelry appraised 6 months ago to ensure that the estate planning was properly structured for tax purposes." 6 months ago. Eleanor had been planning this for 6 months, long enough to be certain of her decision and to handle any legal complications that might arise. I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. Mr. Crawford, Eleanor mentioned the jewelry box to me before, but I never expected. I assumed it would go to family. Patricia's laugh was sharp and contained no warmth. Well, of course your family, dear. It's just that this is quite unexpected. Eleanor never mentioned anything about this to me. But even as she spoke, I could see the calculation in Patricia's eyes. She was already thinking about the implications, already formulating plans for how to handle this unexpected development. I had seen that look before, during family discussions about business decisions or social strategies. It was the look of someone who was not going to accept defeat easily. Mr. Crawford seemed to sense the tension in the room. I should mention that Eleanor left specific instructions about this bequest. She wanted me to ensure that everyone understood this decision was made with complete mental clarity and with full knowledge of the item's value and significance. He pulled out another document from Eleanor's file. She also left a letter for the family, explaining her reasoning. Would you like me to read it now, or would you prefer to review it privately? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Part of me wanted to hear Eleanor's words, to understand her reasoning, and perhaps find validation for this unexpected inheritance. But another part of me was already sensing the undercurrents of disapproval and calculation flowing around the room. Perhaps, David said carefully, we could take some time to process this information before hearing the letter. Patricia nodded quickly, too quickly. Yes, I think that's wise. This is quite a lot to take in. But Mr. Crawford was already shaking his head. I'm afraid Eleanor was quite specific about the timing. She wanted this letter read immediately after the bequest was announced. He opened the sealed envelope and began to read in his measured, professional voice. To my family and friends gathered for the reading of my will, I want to explain my decision regarding my jewelry collection. These pieces have been in my possession for over 50 years, and I have given considerable thought to their future. After much reflection, I have decided to leave them to Rachel, not because she is my granddaughter by marriage, but because she is the only person who has ever shown genuine interest in the stories these pieces tell, and the women who owned them before me. I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes, as Eleanor's voice seemed to speak through Mr. Crawford's formal delivery. I have watched family members admire these pieces for their monetary value or social prestige, but Rachel has always asked about their history, their significance, and their emotional meaning. She has listened to my stories about the women who wore these pieces before me, and she has understood that their true worth lies not in their appraisal value, but in their connection to our family's past. Patricia's face had gone very pale, and her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. I know this decision may surprise some of you, but I want you to understand that it comes from a place of love and careful consideration. Rachel has earned this inheritance through her kindness, her genuine interest in our family history, and her understanding that some gifts are meant to be treasured rather than simply possessed. Mr. Crawford paused, looking around the room before continuing. I trust that my family will respect this decision and support Rachel as she becomes the new custodian of these family treasures. These pieces have brought me joy for many years, and I know they will bring her the same happiness, along with the responsibility of preserving their stories for future generations. The letter concluded with Eleanor's signature and the date, confirming that it had been written just 3 months before her death. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares, the mixture of shock, calculation, and barely contained disapproval that filled the room like a toxic cloud. Finally, Patricia cleared her throat and stood up with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to managing difficult social situations. Well, she said, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness, this is certainly unexpected. Eleanor always was full of surprises. But I could see the storm brewing behind her carefully maintained composure, and I realized that this inheritance, which should have been a beautiful final gift from my beloved grandmother, was about to become the center of a family conflict that would test everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and my own strength. As we left Mr. Crawford's office that afternoon, Patricia linked her arm through mine with a gesture that appeared affectionate but felt possessive. Rachel, dear, she said as we walked toward the parking garage, I think we should have a family gathering this weekend to celebrate Eleanor's life properly. And of course, everyone will want to see the jewelry box that meant so much to her." The way she said, "see the jewelry box," made my stomach clench with anxiety. I realized that the reading of the will had been just the beginning, and that the real battle for Eleanor's legacy was about to begin. That evening, as I sat in my own living room with the mahogany jewelry box resting on my coffee table, I opened it for the first time since inheriting it. The emerald necklace lay coiled against the velvet lining like a sleeping serpent, beautiful and somehow ominous in the lamplight. Eleanor's voice echoed in my memory, telling me I was stronger than I knew and that I would need to stand up for myself. Looking at those precious pieces, I realized that Eleanor had given me more than jewelry. She had given me a test, a challenge to prove that I was worthy of her trust and capable of protecting what she had entrusted to me. I had no idea yet how difficult that test would prove to be, or how much I would learn about myself and my family in the process of meeting it. But sitting there with Eleanor's treasures gleaming softly in the lamplight, I felt the first stirring of the strength she had seen in me, the strength I would need in the days ahead. Patricia's celebration of Eleanor's life was scheduled for the following Saturday at her home in Meadowbrook. The invitation came through David, delivered with the kind of casual authority that made it clear this wasn't really a request. Patricia had already contacted Eleanor's bridge club friends, several neighbors, and what seemed like half of Cedar Falls' social establishment. I spent the week leading up to the gathering in a state of increasing anxiety. Every conversation with David felt loaded with unspoken tension. He would start to say something about the jewelry, then stop himself, leaving sentences hanging in the air like question marks. I could see him struggling with conflicting loyalties, and part of me felt sorry for him. But a larger part of me was frustrated that he seemed more concerned with managing family dynamics than supporting his wife. The mahogany jewelry box sat on our bedroom dresser like a beautiful time bomb. Every morning when I got dressed, I would catch sight of it in the mirror and feel a mixture of gratitude and dread. Eleanor's gift had come with more complications than I had ever imagined. On Thursday evening, 2 days before the gathering, David finally brought up what we had both been avoiding. Quote, "Rachel, I've been thinking about this weekend," he said as we cleaned up after dinner. "Maybe it would be better if you didn't bring the jewelry box." I stopped loading the dishwasher and turned to face him. "Why?" "It's just, emotions are still running high. People are grieving, and seeing the jewelry might be difficult for some family members." "You mean it might be difficult for your mother?" David sighed and leaned against the kitchen counter. "Mom's having a hard time with this, yes. She always assumed Eleanor's jewelry would go to her or Stephanie. She's been talking about those pieces for years, planning which ones she would wear to which events. Planning to wear jewelry that didn't belong to her. That's not fair, Rachel. Mom genuinely loved Eleanor. She's not some gold digger scheming to steal family heirlooms." I closed the dishwasher with more force than necessary. "Then why does she have a problem with Eleanor's decision?" "Because she doesn't understand it," David admitted. "None of us do, really. Eleanor never indicated that she was planning to leave everything to you. From Mom's perspective, it feels like favoritism. From my perspective, it feels like love." We stared at each other across our kitchen, the familiar space suddenly feeling like a battlefield. I could see the conflict in David's eyes, the way he was torn between defending his family and supporting his wife. But what hurt most was the underlying assumption in his words, that Eleanor's decision needed to be understood or justified, as if my inheritance was somehow inappropriate. "I'm bringing the jewelry box," I said finally. "Patricia specifically asked to see it, and I'm not going to hide away, like I've done something wrong." David opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "Just be prepared for some difficult conversations." Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I dressed carefully in a navy blue dress that Eleanor had always complimented, and I spent extra time on my hair and makeup. If I was going to face whatever Patricia had planned, I wanted to look composed and confident. The jewelry box felt heavier than usual as I carried it to the car. David had offered to carry it for me, but something made me want to transport Eleanor's gift myself. It felt important to maintain that physical connection, that tangible reminder of Eleanor's trust in me. Patricia's house was already full when we arrived. Cars lined the circular driveway, and I could see people mingling in the spacious living room through the large front windows. The Hartwell home was everything my childhood house had not been: grand, elegant, and designed to impress. Patricia had inherited her mother-in-law's sense of style, and her husband's success had allowed her to indulge it fully. The moment we walked through the front door, I felt the subtle shift in attention that happens when someone controversial enters a room. Conversations didn't stop, but they became more muted. Glances were exchanged. I could practically feel the curiosity radiating from Eleanor's bridge club friends, who had undoubtedly heard about the jewelry inheritance through the efficient gossip network that connected all of Cedar Falls' social circles. Patricia appeared at my side almost immediately, resplendent in a black silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to appear genuine, but lacking the authentic brightness I had seen her display with people she truly liked. "Rachel, darling, you look lovely," she said, air-kissing my cheek in the European style she had adopted after a trip to France several years earlier. "And you brought Eleanor's little treasure box. How wonderful." There it was again, little treasure box. The diminutive language that somehow managed to make Eleanor's most prized possession sound like a child's toy. "Eleanor would have wanted everyone to see it," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Eleanor had been surprisingly private about her jewelry, sharing it mainly with me during our quiet afternoons together. Patricia guided me toward the living room, one manicured hand resting lightly on my elbow in a gesture that appeared supportive but felt controlling. "I've set up a lovely display area on the antique table by the window. The light there is perfect for showing off beautiful things." The antique table in question was positioned in the center of the room's seating area, ensuring that anyone who wanted to examine the jewelry box would become the focus of attention for everyone present. I realized with growing unease that Patricia had orchestrated this entire event as a kind of performance, with me and Eleanor's jewelry as the unwilling stars. As I placed the mahogany box on the polished surface of the table, conversations around the room gradually quieted. Eleanor's friends moved closer, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been concern. I recognized Mrs. Henderson from the bridge club, along with several other women whose names I knew but couldn't quite remember. "Well," Patricia announced to the room at large, "I think we should all take a moment to appreciate the beautiful jewelry that Eleanor treasured so much. Rachel, would you do the honors?" The request was phrased as a question, but the expectation in Patricia's voice made it clear that refusal wasn't really an option. I found myself in the uncomfortable position of being asked to perform, to display Eleanor's private treasures for the entertainment of people who had known her primarily through social functions and card games. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the brass latch. The familiar click seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. When I lifted the ornate lid, a collective intake of breath swept through the gathered crowd. Even I had to admit that Eleanor's jewelry was stunning when displayed all together. The emerald necklace coiled against the faded velvet, like a snake made of captured starlight. The matching earrings nestled in their individual compartments, each stone catching and reflecting the afternoon light streaming through Patricia's pristine windows. The pearl necklace lay in graceful loops, its lustrous surface seeming to glow with inner warmth. But there were other pieces I hadn't paid much attention to during my quiet afternoons with Eleanor. A sapphire brooch shaped like a crescent moon, diamond bracelets that sparkled like captured ice, a ruby ring that looked like it belonged in a museum display case. "My goodness," whispered Mrs. Henderson, leaning closer to get a better look. "Eleanor, you never told us you had such exquisite pieces." "The emerald set is particularly impressive," added another woman whose name I thought might be Margaret. "Is that the Pemberton collection? I remember hearing stories about those pieces when I was younger." Patricia moved to stand beside the table, positioning herself as the unofficial hostess of this impromptu jewelry viewing. "Yes, these are the pieces Eleanor inherited from her first marriage. They've been in the Pemberton family for generations." The way she said Eleanor inherited carried a subtle emphasis, as if she was reminding everyone that Eleanor had not purchased these pieces herself, but had acquired them through marriage. I felt a flush of anger at the implication that Eleanor's ownership was somehow less legitimate because she had inherited, rather than bought the jewelry. "They're absolutely magnificent," said Mrs. Henderson, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Eleanor was so fortunate to be their custodian. Custodian. The word hit me like a revelation. That's exactly what Eleanor had been, and what she had entrusted me to become. Not an owner in the possessive sense, but a caretaker responsible for preserving these pieces and their stories for future generations. "The responsibility must be overwhelming," Patricia said, her voice carrying just the right note of sympathetic concern. "Proper insurance alone for pieces like these must cost thousands of dollars annually. And the security concerns? Well, one can't just keep items this valuable sitting around in any ordinary jewelry box." Several heads nodded in agreement. I could see the seed Patricia was planting. The idea that I was unprepared for the responsibility of caring for such valuable items. "Eleanor always kept them in this box," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She felt that jewelry should be accessible, not locked away where it could never be enjoyed. "Well, yes," Patricia agreed with a laugh that sounded patronizing to my ears. "But Eleanor lived in a different era. Security concerns are much more serious now. These pieces really should be properly appraised, insured, and stored in a professional facility." The conversation continued around me, but I found myself focusing on the individual faces in the crowd. Some showed genuine interest in the jewelry and Eleanor's stories. Others displayed the kind of calculating assessment that I was beginning to recognize as a Hartwell family trait. A few looked uncomfortable, as if they sensed the undercurrents of tension flowing beneath the surface of polite conversation. It was Mrs. Henderson who asked the question that changed everything. "Rachel, dear, have you thought about what Eleanor would have wanted you to do with these pieces? I mean, they're certainly too valuable for everyday wear." "Actually," I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice, "Eleanor specifically told me she wanted them to be worn and enjoyed, not hidden away. She said jewelry that's never worn becomes meaningless decoration." Patricia's smile became noticeably strained. Of course, Eleanor was always sentimental about these things. But sentiment aside, there are practical considerations. The insurance requirements alone would be quite complex for someone who isn't familiar with handling valuable collections. "Are you suggesting I'm not capable of caring for them properly?" The question came out sharper than I had intended, but I was tired of Patricia's subtle implications. "Not at all, dear," Patricia replied smoothly. "I'm simply pointing out that managing a collection like this requires expertise and resources that not everyone possesses. It's nothing to be ashamed of." Nothing to be ashamed of. As if my supposed inadequacy was a character flaw that I should accept gracefully. The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. Everyone could sense the tension between Patricia and me, but no one seemed willing to acknowledge it directly. David appeared at my elbow, his face showing the strain of watching his wife and mother engage in what was essentially a public confrontation disguised as polite conversation. "Maybe we should let people mingle," he suggested, his voice carrying a forced lightness. "There's plenty of time to admire Eleanor's collection." But Patricia wasn't finished. "Actually, David, I was hoping we could discuss something as a family. About the jewelry collection, and how best to honor Eleanor's memory." She gestured toward the seating area adjacent to the antique table, clearly expecting me to join what felt increasingly like an intervention. The other guests began to drift away, giving us privacy while remaining close enough to overhear whatever drama was about to unfold. I remained standing beside the jewelry box, my hands resting protectively on its edges. "What kind of discussion did you have in mind?" Patricia settled gracefully into her favorite chair, the Queen Anne piece that dominated the seating area like a throne. "I've been thinking about the best way to preserve Eleanor's legacy. These pieces have such historical significance, and I worry about them being scattered or lost over time." "They're not going to be scattered or lost," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "Eleanor entrusted them to me, and I intend to honor that trust." "Of course you do, dear, but consider the practical implications. You and David rent your home, correct? And your neighborhood, while perfectly nice, isn't exactly equipped for storing items worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. The sum hit me like a physical blow. I had known the jewelry was valuable, but hearing Patricia quantify it so precisely made the weight of responsibility feel crushing. "What are you suggesting?" David asked, though I could tell from his tone that he already suspected where this conversation was heading. "I'm suggesting we consider a family trust," Patricia replied, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used when she was absolutely certain she was right. "A legal arrangement that would ensure these pieces remain in the family while providing proper security and insurance. Rachel would certainly have access to wear them for special occasions, but the collection would be professionally managed. A family trust." Translation: Patricia wanted legal control over Eleanor's jewelry while allowing me to borrow pieces like a teenager asking to use her mother's car. "Eleanor didn't leave the jewelry to a family trust," I pointed out. "She left it to me, specifically and intentionally. Eleanor made that decision without fully understanding the complexities involved." Patricia countered. "She was thinking with her heart, not her head. It's up to us to ensure her wishes are honored in a practical way." The patronizing dismissal of Eleanor's judgment sparked something hot and angry in my chest. Eleanor was completely competent when she made her will. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Of course she was competent," Patricia agreed quickly. "But she may not have realized the burden she was placing on you. The responsibility, the liability, the security concerns. These aren't things Eleanor had to worry about when she kept the jewelry in her bedroom dresser. She kept it there because she believed jewelry should be part of daily life, not locked away in some vault." "Which was fine for Eleanor," Patricia said with the patient tone of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. "But you're young, Rachel. You have decades ahead of you to worry about theft, insurance claims, security systems. Is that really how you want to spend your time?" The conversation felt like a trap closing around me. Every point Patricia made sounded reasonable on the surface, but underneath each suggestion was the clear implication that I was naive, unprepared, and ultimately unworthy of Eleanor's trust. Mrs. Henderson, who had been listening from a respectful distance, approached our group with the careful manner of someone trying to diffuse tension. "If I may," she said gently, "I remember Eleanor speaking about these pieces many times over the years. She was very particular about their care, but she was also very clear about wanting them to be enjoyed, rather than hidden away." Patricia's smile became more strained. "Of course, we all want to honor Eleanor's wishes. But sometimes loving someone means protecting them from decisions that might not be in their best interest." "Are you saying Eleanor's decision to leave me the jewelry wasn't in my best interest?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm saying Eleanor's decision was made with love, but perhaps without full consideration of the consequences." That was the moment when I realized Patricia would never accept Eleanor's choice. No amount of reasoning or discussion would change her fundamental belief that I was unworthy of the inheritance. She had already decided that Eleanor's judgment was flawed, and that she knew better than my grandmother what should happen to the jewelry. Standing there in Patricia's elegant living room, surrounded by people who had known Eleanor for decades but had never really understood her, I felt something shift inside me. The anxiety and uncertainty that had plagued me since the will reading began to transform into something harder and more determined. "Patricia," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning in my chest, "Eleanor chose me to inherit her jewelry collection, not because she was confused or sentimental, but because she trusted me to value these pieces for the right reasons. I intend to honor that trust, regardless of anyone else's opinion about my qualifications." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension. David looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot like he wanted to escape the entire situation. Several of Eleanor's friends exchanged glances that suggested they were witnessing something that would be discussed in detail during future bridge games. Patricia's mask of polite concern finally slipped completely, revealing something colder and more calculating underneath. "Well," she said, her voice carrying a new edge, "I suppose we'll have to agree to disagree. But Rachel, I hope you'll consider the legal and financial implications of your decision. These pieces belong to the Hartwell family heritage, and there may be complications if they're not properly managed." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Patricia was suggesting that she might pursue legal action to challenge Eleanor's will, or my right to inherit the jewelry. "Is that a threat?" I asked, surprised by my own boldness. "Of course not, dear," Patricia replied, her smile returning but lacking any warmth. "I'm simply pointing out realities that Eleanor may not have considered." But I could see in her eyes that it was exactly a threat. Patricia had decided that if she couldn't convince me to voluntarily surrender control of the jewelry, she would find other ways to get what she believed should rightfully be hers. As the gathering continued around us, I remained standing beside Eleanor's jewelry box, my hands protective on its polished surface. The afternoon had revealed something crucial about my place in the Hartwell family dynamics. Despite 6 years of marriage, despite Eleanor's explicit wishes, despite the legal clarity of the inheritance, I was still viewed as an outsider who needed to be managed and controlled. But the afternoon had also revealed something else. Eleanor had been right about my strength, standing up to Patricia, defending my inheritance. Refusing to be intimidated by her subtle threats had felt terrifying but also oddly empowering. For the first time since the will reading, I felt like I truly understood why Eleanor had chosen me to carry on her legacy. The jewelry pieces gleamed in their velvet compartments, each one carrying not just monetary value but the stories of strong women who had refused to be dismissed or diminished. Eleanor had worn these pieces as armor against a world that often undervalued women's intelligence and independence. Now she had passed that armor to me, along with the responsibility to prove myself worthy of wearing it. As I carefully closed the jewelry box at the end of the afternoon, I realized this had been more than a social gathering. It had been my first real test as Eleanor's chosen heir, and despite Patricia's attempts to undermine my confidence, I had passed. I had defended Eleanor's decision and my own right to inherit her treasures. But I also realized this was just the beginning. Patricia's final threat made it clear that she wasn't going to accept defeat gracefully. The battle for Eleanor's legacy was far from over, and I would need every bit of the strength Eleanor had seen in me to win it. The drive home from Patricia's house was silent except for the sound of rain pattering against the windshield. David kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his jaw tight with tension. I sat holding the jewelry box in my lap, feeling its weight like an anchor, keeping me grounded in a world that suddenly felt unstable and unpredictable. "That was a disaster," David finally said as we pulled into our driveway. "Your mother threatened to take legal action against me," I replied, making no move to get out of the car. "How exactly is that my fault? She didn't threaten you." "She just pointed out some practical concerns." I turned to look at my husband of 6 years, this man who had promised to love and protect me, and realized he had been in the same room but witnessed an entirely different conversation. "David, your mother essentially told a room full of people that I'm too poor and stupid to properly care for valuable jewelry. She suggested creating a legal trust so I could borrow the pieces like a child asking permission to play with grown-up toys. How is that not threatening? Mom's just trying to help. She has experience with valuable collections, and she understands the legal complexities involved. What she understands is that she doesn't think I deserve Eleanor's jewelry." David turned off the engine and finally looked at me. In the dim light of our garage, his face showed the exhaustion of someone caught between two forces he couldn't control. "What do you want me to do, Rachel?" "Mom's grieving too. Eleanor's death has been hard on the whole family, and seeing those jewelry pieces go to someone outside the bloodline has been difficult for her to accept." Someone outside the bloodline. The phrase hit me like a slap. Is that how you see me too? After 6 years of marriage, am I still an outsider? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you agree with your mother that Eleanor made a mistake leaving her jewelry to someone who isn't really family. David sighed and rubbed his temples. "I just think there might be ways to handle this that would make everyone happy. Maybe Mom's idea about a family trust isn't such a bad compromise." "A compromise?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "David, this isn't a business negotiation. This is my inheritance from someone who loved me enough to trust me with her most precious possessions. Would you ask your mother to compromise if someone tried to take away something your father had left specifically to her? That's different." "How is it different?" "Because..." David started, then stopped. I could see him struggling to find words that wouldn't reveal the ugly truth we were both dancing around. Because your mother is a Hartwell by blood, and I'm not. I finished for him. Because despite 6 years of marriage, I'm still the outsider who needs to prove she belongs. Rachel, that's not fair. What's not fair is watching my husband side with his mother against his wife. What's not fair is being made to feel guilty for accepting a gift that was freely and legally given to me. I got out of the car, still clutching the jewelry box, and walked toward our back door. David followed, but the space between us felt like a chasm that had opened up during that awful afternoon. Inside our house, I set the jewelry box carefully on our dining room table and opened it one more time. The emerald necklace gleamed in the overhead light, beautiful and somehow defiant. Eleanor had worn this piece to important events, social gatherings, where she needed to project confidence and strength. Looking at it now, I understood why she had chosen these particular pieces to pass down to me. They weren't just jewelry, they were tools for surviving in a world that often dismissed women's worth. Rachel, David said from the doorway, his voice carrying a pleading tone I'd rarely heard before. I don't want to fight about this. Mom will come around eventually. She just needs time to adjust to the idea. What if she doesn't come around? What if she follows through on her threat to create legal complications? She won't. Mom talks tough sometimes, but she wouldn't actually take legal action against family. I'm not sure I'm family to her anymore. That night, I lay awake listening to David's breathing and thinking about everything that had happened since Eleanor's death. The woman I had been just 2 weeks ago would have probably accepted Patricia's suggestions about the family trust. She would have told herself that keeping peace was more important than asserting her rights, that being agreeable was better than being difficult. But something had changed during that confrontation at Patricia's house. Maybe it was the way she had dismissed Eleanor's judgment as sentimental and impractical. Maybe it was her casual assumption that I would be grateful for the privilege of borrowing jewelry that legally belonged to me. Or maybe it was the realization that no amount of compliance would ever make Patricia truly accept me as an equal member of the family. Whatever had shifted, I knew I couldn't go back to being the accommodating daughter-in-law who swallowed her objections to keep everyone else comfortable. Eleanor had seen something in me that I was just beginning to recognize in myself, the capacity to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. The next morning, I made a decision that would have terrified me just a week earlier. I called Mr. Crawford's office and made an appointment to see him privately. If Patricia was planning legal maneuvers, I needed to understand exactly what rights I had and how to protect them. Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Crawford greeted me when I arrived at his office Monday afternoon. How can I help you today? I explained the conversation at Patricia's house, including her suggestions about a family trust and her veiled threats about legal complications. Mr. Crawford listened carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. I need to understand something, I said when I had finished recounting the weekend's events. Can Patricia actually challenge Eleanor's will? Can she force me to give up the jewelry or put it into some kind of trust? Mr. Crawford leaned back in his chair, his expression serious but reassuring. Mrs. Hartwell, I want you to understand something very clearly. Eleanor's will is legally binding and was executed with full competency. We have medical documentation confirming her mental state at the time she made these decisions. But what if Patricia claims Eleanor was coerced or didn't understand the value of what she was giving away? That would be extremely difficult to prove, especially given the documentation we have. Eleanor specifically requested updated appraisals for all the jewelry pieces 6 months before her death. She was completely aware of their monetary value. Mr. Crawford opened Eleanor's file and pulled out a thick folder. Furthermore, Eleanor left very detailed instructions about her reasoning for these bequests. She documented her decision-making process extensively. What kind of documentation? Letters explaining her choices, records of conversations she had with family members about inheritance, even notes about specific incidents that influenced her decisions. My heart started racing. What kind of incidents? Mr. Crawford consulted his notes. Eleanor documented several occasions when family members made comments about her jewelry that she found troubling. Conversations where people discussed the monetary value of pieces while ignoring their emotional significance. Comments about how certain items should stay in the family that made her feel like an outsider in her own home. She heard Patricia talking about her jewelry? According to her notes, yes. Eleanor was quite concerned about what she saw as a transactional approach to family heirlooms. She wanted her jewelry to go to someone who valued the stories and connections, not just the dollar amounts. Mr. Crawford pulled out another document. Eleanor also left this sealed letter with instructions that it should only be opened if anyone attempted to challenge your inheritance through legal action. I stared at the envelope, which bore my name in Eleanor's careful handwriting. The fact that she had anticipated this conflict and prepared for it made me feel both grateful and sad. Eleanor had known her family well enough to predict exactly what would happen after her death. What should I do if Patricia continues pressuring me about a family trust or threatens legal action? Refer her to me, Mr. Crawford said firmly. Any challenges to Eleanor's will would have to go through proper legal channels, and I can assure you that we have more than sufficient documentation to defend your inheritance. And if she tries to pressure David to convince me to give up the jewelry, that would constitute harassment, and we could pursue legal remedies if necessary. Mrs. Hartwell, I want you to understand that Eleanor chose you very deliberately. She spent months planning these bequests, and she was absolutely certain about her decisions. Leaving Mr. Crawford's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the day of the will reading. Confidence. Eleanor hadn't just left me beautiful jewelry. She had armed me with the legal and emotional tools I would need to protect her gift. That evening, I decided to have a conversation with David that was long overdue. I had spent our entire marriage trying to avoid conflict with his family, accommodating their preferences, and swallowing my own feelings to maintain harmony. But Eleanor's inheritance had forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes avoiding conflict meant sacrificing your own dignity and rights. David, I said as we finished dinner, I went to see Mr. Crawford today. David's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Why? Because your mother threatened legal action against me, and I wanted to understand what that might mean. Rachel, she didn't threaten you. She just suggested some alternatives. David, stop. My voice was sharper than I had intended, but I was tired of having the same circular conversation. I need you to listen to me, really listen, without trying to defend your mother or minimize what happened. David set down his fork and looked at me with the wary expression of someone who sensed a difficult conversation approaching. Your mother believes I don't deserve Eleanor's jewelry because I'm not blood family. She thinks Eleanor was confused or sentimental when she made her will. She suggested creating a legal arrangement that would give her control over the jewelry, while allowing me to borrow pieces occasionally. When I refused, she made vague threats about legal complications and suggested that there might be problems if the jewelry wasn't properly managed. She's just concerned about… No. I held up my hand to stop him. You asked me to listen, and now I need you to do the same. Your mother is not concerned about proper management or security. She's angry that Eleanor chose me over her, and she's trying to find ways to override Eleanor's decision. David opened his mouth to object, but I continued before he could speak. Mr. Crawford told me today that Eleanor documented her reasons for leaving me the jewelry. She heard family members discussing the monetary value of her pieces while ignoring their emotional significance. She was troubled by comments about keeping items in the family that made her feel like an outsider in her own home. David's face went pale. Mom never meant. David, I don't care what your mother meant. I care about what she did and what she's continuing to do. Eleanor left me her jewelry because she trusted me to value it properly. Your mother wants to take it away because she thinks I'm unworthy of that trust. I took a deep breath, preparing to say something that would change our relationship forever. I need to know right now whether you're going to support your wife or continue enabling your mother's attempts to steal my inheritance. That's not fair. She's not trying to steal anything. Then what would you call it when someone tries to convince you to give up something that legally belongs to you? David pushed back from the table and stood up, agitation written across his entire body. I would call it family trying to work out a complicated situation. A situation that wouldn't be complicated if your mother accepted Eleanor's decision. Mom loved Eleanor. She's not some villain trying to steal jewelry from her daughter-in-law. Then why can't she accept that Eleanor chose to leave the jewelry to me? David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of dealing with stress. Because it doesn't make sense to her. You and Eleanor were close, but Mom and Stephanie are blood relatives. From her perspective, family heirlooms should stay with blood family. And from your perspective? David was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence I heard the answer he was afraid to speak out loud. You think she's right? I said, the realization hitting me like cold water. You think Eleanor should have left the jewelry to your mother or sister? I think Eleanor loved you and wanted to show that love through a generous gift. But I also think she might not have considered all the complications that gift would create. Such as the fact that you're not equipped to handle items worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Such as the fact that keeping them creates security risks for our entire neighborhood. Such as the fact that family heirlooms have emotional significance for multiple people, not just the person who inherits them. There it was, David's true opinion, delivered with the careful reasonableness that made it sound logical rather than hurtful. In his mind, I was a well-meaning but naive woman who had been given responsibilities beyond my capabilities. So you think I should give the jewelry to your mother? I think we should consider arrangements that would satisfy everyone involved. Everyone except me. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. You want me to give up my legal inheritance to make your mother happy. And you're framing it as a reasonable compromise rather than acknowledging that it's capitulation to emotional blackmail. David stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. In 6 years of marriage, I had never spoken to him with such directness about his family's behavior or his own role in enabling it. I don't know who you've become since Eleanor died, he said finally. This isn't like you. You're right. The old me would have given in by now. The old me would have told herself that keeping peace was more important than standing up for herself. But Eleanor saw something in me that I'm just beginning to recognize, and I'm not going to dishonor her memory by pretending I don't deserve what she gave me. So what happens now? Now you decide whether you're married to me or to your mother's opinion of what's appropriate. I left David standing in our kitchen and went to our bedroom, where Eleanor's jewelry box sat on my dresser like a beautiful reminder of everything that was at stake. Opening it carefully, I touched the emerald necklace that Eleanor had worn when she needed to feel strong and confident. For the first time since inheriting these pieces, I understood that they weren't just beautiful objects or valuable investments. They were symbols of women's independence, tokens of strength passed down from one generation to the next. Eleanor had worn them when she needed courage, and now she was offering me the same armor. That night, David slept in the guest room again, but this time it felt less like a punishment and more like a necessary space for both of us to think about what kind of marriage we wanted to have going forward. I lay in our bed, looking at the jewelry box gleaming softly in the moonlight from our bedroom window, and realized that Eleanor's gift had already changed me in ways I was just beginning to understand. The woman who had inherited that jewelry 2 weeks ago had been afraid of conflict, eager to please, and willing to sacrifice her own needs for the sake of family harmony. The woman I was becoming understood that some things were worth fighting for, and that real love meant supporting someone's rights, even when it created complications. Eleanor had seen this potential in me and had given me both the motivation and the tools to claim it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, I was certain. Patricia wouldn't give up easily, and David's divided loyalties would continue to strain our marriage. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt ready for whatever came next. Eleanor had chosen me to carry on her legacy, and I was finally beginning to understand what that meant. It wasn't just about caring for beautiful jewelry or preserving family history. It was about refusing to be diminished by people who thought they knew better than you did what you deserved. Looking at the emerald necklace gleaming in its velvet compartment, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Tomorrow, I was going to wear Eleanor's jewelry to work. Not because I needed to prove anything to anyone else, but because I was finally ready to prove something to myself. The woman Eleanor had seen in me was emerging, and she wasn't going to apologize for taking up space in the world. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a sharp contrast to the stormy weather that had marked the weekend's conflicts. I woke early, before my alarm, and lay in bed for several minutes, listening to the sounds of our neighborhood coming to life. David had already left for work, avoiding the uncomfortable conversation that hung between us like fog. I rose and moved to my dresser, where Eleanor's jewelry box waited like a faithful companion. For weeks, I had opened it tentatively, almost apologetically, as if I were borrowing something that didn't quite belong to me. This morning felt different. I lifted the lid with the confidence of ownership, the certainty of someone who finally understood her rights. The emerald necklace lay coiled in its compartment, the stones catching the morning light streaming through our bedroom window. Eleanor had told me once that she wore this piece whenever she needed to remind herself of her own worth. Today felt like exactly that kind of day. I dressed carefully for work, choosing a simple black blouse that would showcase the necklace without competing with it. As I fastened the clasp behind my neck, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. The emeralds transformed not just my appearance but my entire bearing. I stood straighter, my chin lifted higher, my eyes meeting my own reflection with newfound confidence. The matching earrings completed the ensemble. As I secured them, I thought about the generations of women who had worn these pieces before me. Eleanor's first mother-in-law, Margaret Pemberton, who had built charity organizations and funded hospital wings. Eleanor herself, who had navigated 2 marriages and decades of social expectations with grace and determination. Now these pieces were mine, not just to wear, but to embody the strength they represented. At the Cedar Falls Community Center, where I worked as a program coordinator, my appearance caused an immediate stir. My colleague Sandra nearly dropped her coffee when she saw me walk into our shared office space. "Rachel, that necklace is absolutely stunning," she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "Is it new?" "It was my grandmother's," I replied, enjoying the way the emeralds caught the fluorescent office lighting. "She passed away recently and left me her jewelry collection." "It's incredible. You look like royalty." Royalty. The word resonated in a way I hadn't expected. For years, I had felt like a subject in the Hartwell Kingdom, someone who needed permission to exist in their social sphere. But wearing Eleanor's emeralds, I felt like I had claim to my own throne. Throughout the morning, people stopped by my office to compliment the necklace and ask about its history. I found myself telling Eleanor's story with growing confidence, sharing details about her first marriage to Charles Pemberton and the legacy of strong women who had owned these pieces before me. Each telling made me feel more connected to that legacy and more certain about my right to continue it. It was just before lunch when my phone rang with a call that would change everything. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Dr. Victoria Ashford from the Minneapolis Institute of Art. I hope I'm not catching you at a difficult time." My heart stopped. The Minneapolis Institute of Art was one of the most prestigious cultural institutions in the region. Why would they be calling me? "Not at all. How can I help you?" "I'm calling about the Pemberton Emerald Collection that you recently inherited. We've had some inquiries about the historical significance of those pieces, and we're wondering if you might be interested in discussing them with our curatorial staff." I sat down heavily in my desk chair. Inquiries from whom? Judge Morrison mentioned seeing the necklace at a recent social event. He's been a supporter of our jewelry exhibitions for many years, and he thought we might be interested in learning more about the collection's provenance. Judge Morrison. I remembered him from Patricia's gathering, one of the few people who had seemed genuinely interested in the historical significance, rather than just the monetary value of the pieces. "What kind of discussion did you have in mind?" "We're planning an exhibition next year focused on jewelry with documented historical provenance in Minnesota families. The Pemberton collection could be a centerpiece, especially given the documentation your grandmother apparently maintained about each piece." Eleanor kept very detailed records, I confirmed, thinking about the folders of documentation I had discovered in her bedroom. "Would you be available to meet with our team sometime this week? We'd love to examine the pieces and discuss the possibility of including them in the exhibition." After arranging a meeting for Thursday afternoon, I sat staring at my phone in amazement. The jewelry that Patricia considered too valuable and important for me to handle properly was being courted by one of the region's most respected museums. Eleanor's careful documentation of each piece's history was exactly what made them suitable for scholarly exhibition. I spent my lunch break calling Mr. Crawford to inform him about the museum's interest and to ask about any legal considerations regarding public exhibition of the pieces. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is wonderful news," he said when I explained the situation. "Eleanor would be absolutely thrilled." She spent years researching the history of each piece, and she always hoped someone would eventually share those stories with a wider audience. Did Eleanor ever mention wanting the jewelry exhibited publicly? Actually, yes. She left detailed notes about her research and expressed hope that someday the pieces might be displayed in a way that would educate people about the women who had owned them. She saw herself as a custodian, rather than just an owner. That afternoon, I called Nicole to share the exciting news about the museum's interest. Her reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "Rachel, this is incredible! The Minneapolis Institute of Art doesn't just call random people about jewelry exhibitions. This means your pieces are genuinely significant from a historical perspective." I keep pinching myself. 3 weeks ago, I was afraid I didn't deserve to inherit these pieces, and now a major museum wants to exhibit them. You know what this means, don't you? Nicole's voice carried a satisfaction I could hear even over the phone. What? It means Eleanor chose exactly the right person to inherit her collection. Someone who would value the history and stories, not just the dollar signs. That evening, David came home to find me sitting at our dining room table with Eleanor's jewelry box open and several pieces laid out on velvet cloths. I was photographing each item with my phone, documenting them for my meeting with the museum curators. "What's all this?" he asked, setting down his briefcase with the weary expression of someone who wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "The Minneapolis Institute of Art called today. They're interested in exhibiting Eleanor's jewelry collection as part of a historical exhibition next year." David's expression shifted from exhaustion to confusion. "A museum wants to display the jewelry?" Judge Morrison told them about the Pemberton Emerald collection. Apparently, Eleanor's documentation of each piece's history makes them particularly valuable for scholarly exhibition. I couldn't keep the pride out of my voice as I explained the curator's enthusiasm about Eleanor's research and the historical significance of the collection. David listened in silence, his face showing the same processing expression he wore when trying to solve complex problems at work. "That's unexpected," he said finally. "It's validation," I corrected. "It proves that Eleanor knew exactly what she was doing when she left these pieces to me. A major museum doesn't call about collections that belong in family safety deposit boxes." David sat down across from me, studying the emerald necklace that lay gleaming on its velvet cloth. "Mom's not gonna like this. Your mother's opinion isn't relevant to my decisions about my inheritance. Rachel, she's still family. This exhibition thing is going to make her feel even more excluded from Eleanor's legacy." I looked at my husband across our dining room table, this man who still couldn't understand that his mother's feelings didn't give her the right to control my choices. "David, your mother excluded herself from Eleanor's legacy by focusing on monetary value instead of emotional significance. Eleanor documented that in her notes. She heard family members discussing how much the jewelry was worth while ignoring what it represented. When did you become so hard?" The question stung because it revealed how David saw my newfound assertiveness. In his mind, standing up for myself wasn't growth or strength. It was an unpleasant change in my personality. "I'm not hard. I'm finally awake. For 6 years, I've tried to earn approval from people who were never going to give it to me. Eleanor saw who I really was underneath all that people-pleasing, and she trusted me with something precious. I'm not going to dishonor that trust by pretending I don't deserve it." David was quiet for a long moment, absently tracing patterns on the table with his finger. "What happens to us if you keep pushing this conflict with my family? What happens to us if I don't? What happens to our marriage if I have to give up parts of myself to keep your mother happy?" "I don't know," he admitted, and the honesty in his voice was more frightening than anger would have been. That night, we went to bed without resolving anything, but the conversation had clarified something important. David saw my inheritance as a problem to be managed rather than a gift to be celebrated. His primary concern wasn't supporting his wife's rights, but maintaining peace with his mother, even if that peace came at my expense. Thursday's meeting at the Minneapolis Institute of Art was everything I had hoped it would be. Dr. Ashford turned out to be a woman in her 50s, with an infectious enthusiasm for jewelry history. She was joined by 2 other curators and a conservation specialist who examined each piece with the reverence of people who understood their significance. "The documentation your grandmother maintained is extraordinary," Dr. Ashford said as she reviewed Eleanor's carefully organized files. She essentially created a complete provenance record for each piece. This level of historical documentation is rare for private collections. Eleanor was very thorough about everything, I replied, watching as the conservation specialist examined the emerald necklace under a magnifying glass. The craftsmanship is exceptional, the specialist noted. These emeralds are probably Colombian, and the setting work suggests they were created by a master jeweler in the early 1900s. The historical value is actually greater than the monetary value. Dr. Ashford looked up from Eleanor's research files. Mrs. Hartwell, would you be interested in being involved in the exhibition as more than just a lender? Your grandmother's research could form the basis for a fascinating educational component about women as collectors and custodians of family history. The suggestion took my breath away. Not only did they want to display Eleanor's jewelry, but they wanted to showcase her scholarship and my role in continuing her legacy. I'd be honored, I managed to say. We're thinking about a spring exhibition, which would give us time to properly research and present each piece. You'd have complete control over how your family's story is told, and of course the pieces would be returned to you after the exhibition. Driving home from the museum, I felt like I was floating. The curators had treated me as an equal partner in preserving and sharing Eleanor's legacy. They had asked thoughtful questions about each piece's history and listened respectfully to the stories Eleanor had shared with me. For the first time since inheriting the jewelry, I felt like I was exactly where Eleanor had intended me to be. That euphoria lasted until I walked into our house and found Patricia sitting in our living room with David. "Hello, Rachel," Patricia said, her voice carrying the controlled politeness she used when she was deeply angry. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. David told me about your museum meeting and I thought we should discuss it." I set my purse down carefully, buying myself time to process this ambush. David hadn't mentioned anything about his mother coming over, which meant he had either invited her without telling me or had shared information about my museum meeting that prompted her to invite herself. "What did you want to discuss?" "I'm concerned about the publicity implications of a museum exhibition. The Hartwell name will be associated with this display, and I want to make sure the family's reputation is protected. The exhibition would focus on the Pemberton collection and Eleanor's research. The Hartwell name wouldn't be prominently featured." Patricia's smile became tighter. "Rachel, dear, you're a Hartwell by marriage. Anything you do publicly reflects on the entire family." There it was again, the reminder that my connection to the family was conditional and subject to their approval. The museum curators were very impressed with Eleanor's documentation and research, I said, moving to stand behind one of our chairs rather than sitting down. I wanted to maintain the option of leaving if this conversation went badly. I'm sure they were. Eleanor always was meticulous about record keeping. But I'm not sure a public exhibition is what she would have wanted. Actually, Mr. Crawford told me that Eleanor specifically hoped the jewelry might someday be displayed publicly so people could learn about the women who had owned the pieces. Patricia's composure slipped slightly. "Mr. Crawford said that?" Eleanor left detailed notes about her hopes for the collection's future. She saw herself as a custodian rather than just an owner. "Well, regardless of what Eleanor may have written, I think it's important to consider the current family's feelings about such public exposure." I looked at David, who was sitting uncomfortably on our couch, avoiding eye contact with both his mother and me. "David, did you ask your mother to come here?" "I thought she should know about the museum's interest," he said, still not meeting my eyes. "And I asked her to come talk to you because I'm worried about where this is all heading." Patricia leaned forward slightly, sensing an opportunity. "David's right to be concerned. This whole situation is creating unnecessary tension in the family. The museum exhibition would only make things worse. How would sharing Eleanor's story and preserving her research make things worse? Because it would be a public statement that the jewelry belongs to you permanently, rather than being held in trust for the family. The jewelry does belong to me permanently. That's what inheritance means." "Rachel," Patricia's voice took on the patronizing tone I had learned to hate. "You're young and you're emotional about Eleanor's death. You're not thinking clearly about the long-term implications of these decisions. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're so determined to prove some kind of point that you're willing to damage family relationships and create public spectacles. I felt something hot and dangerous building in my chest. Patricia was doing exactly what she had done at her house, using reasonable-sounding language to make me feel guilty for asserting my rights. Patricia, I need you to leave. Both she and David looked startled by the directness of my request. Rachel, David started, maybe we should all just calm down and… I'm not going to be ambushed in my own home by someone who thinks my inheritance is up for family negotiation. Patricia, you need to leave. Now. Patricia stood slowly, her face showing the kind of cold anger that comes when someone accustomed to getting their way encounters unexpected resistance. I hope you'll reconsider the museum exhibition, she said, gathering her purse with deliberate dignity. Some decisions can't be undone once they're made public. Is that a threat? It's a reality. Public actions have public consequences. After Patricia left, David and I stood in our living room, staring at each other across a divide that felt wider than it had ever been. I can't believe you asked her to leave, David said. I can't believe you ambushed me with her presence. I was trying to help facilitate a conversation. You were trying to gang up on me to change my mind about the exhibition. David sat down heavily on our couch, looking older than his 34 years. Rachel, I don't know how to navigate this situation. You've become someone I don't recognize, and my family feels like you're deliberately trying to hurt them. I've become someone who stands up for herself, instead of apologizing for existing. If your family sees that as hurtful, that says more about them than it does about me. What do you want from me? I want you to be my husband instead of your mother's son. I want you to celebrate my successes, instead of treating them like problems. I want you to trust that Eleanor made the right choice instead of assuming she made a mistake. And if I can't do that, the question hung in the air between us like a sword waiting to fall. We both knew we were approaching a moment that would define the future of our marriage. Then I guess we'll both have to live with the consequences of that choice, I said finally. That night, as I prepared Eleanor's jewelry for secure storage, I realized that the museum exhibition represented more than just public recognition of the collection's historical value. It would be my declaration of independence, my public statement, that I was worthy of Eleanor's trust and confident in my role as custodian of her legacy. Patricia's threats about public consequences didn't frighten me anymore. I had spent 6 years trying to avoid consequences by accommodating everyone else's preferences, and all it had gotten me was a marriage where my own husband didn't fully support my rights. Eleanor had worn these emeralds when she needed courage to face difficult social situations. Tomorrow I would wear them to work again, and every day after that until the museum exhibition opened. The woman Eleanor had seen in me was finally ready to take her place in the world, whatever the cost might be. The weeks leading up to the museum exhibition opening passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Dr. Ashford and her team worked closely with me to develop educational materials about each piece in Eleanor's collection, and I found myself spending hours at the institute, learning about conservation techniques and exhibition design. For the first time in my adult life, I was involved in work that felt truly meaningful, something that honored both Eleanor's memory and my own capabilities. The transformation in my daily routine was remarkable. I began wearing different pieces from Eleanor's collection to work regularly, each one making me feel more connected to the legacy of strong women who had owned them before me. My colleagues at the community center grew accustomed to seeing me adorned with genuine pearls or vintage diamond earrings, and the respectful attention these pieces garnered helped me understand Eleanor's wisdom in insisting that jewelry should be worn rather than hidden away. David's response to my involvement with the museum was complex and increasingly distant. He attended one of the planning meetings at my invitation, sitting quietly in the corner while Dr. Ashford explained the exhibition's educational goals and my role in developing the historical narrative. Afterward, his only comment was that he was surprised by how knowledgeable I had become about jewelry history and museum practices. "You're like a different person," he said as we drove home from the institute. "I'm not sure I recognize you anymore." "I'm the same person I always was," I replied, adjusting Eleanor's pearl necklace in the rearview mirror. "I'm just finally allowed to be myself without apologizing for it." The comment hung between us for the rest of the drive, highlighting the fundamental disconnect that had opened in our marriage. David missed the accommodating woman who had prioritized everyone else's comfort over her own growth, while I was discovering capabilities and interests I had never been encouraged to explore. Patricia's campaign against the museum exhibition intensified as the opening date approached. She began calling family, friends, and acquaintances, sharing her concerns about what she termed my, quote, public display of private family matters. Her strategy was subtle but effective. She positioned herself as the voice of reason, trying to protect family dignity while portraying me as an attention-seeking outsider who didn't understand proper behavior. The effectiveness of her approach became clear when Mrs. Henderson called me at work one afternoon. Her voice carefully neutral in a way that suggested she was repeating talking points she had heard elsewhere. "Rachel, dear, I've been hearing about this museum exhibition from several people. Are you certain this is what Eleanor would have wanted? She was always so private about her personal affairs." Mrs. Henderson. Eleanor specifically documented her hope that the jewelry's history would someday be shared publicly. She wanted people to learn about the women who had owned these pieces. Well, if you're sure. It's just that some people are concerned about the appropriateness of such public attention. Family matters have traditionally been kept within the family in our social circle. After hanging up, I realized that Patricia was systematically undermining my reputation within Cedar Falls' tight-knit social network. She was using the same reasonable tone and concern for propriety that had initially made her suggestions about a family trust sound logical, but now she was applying those tactics to damage my standing in the community. The attack intensified when I received a call from my supervisor at the community center. Janet Morrison was a fair-minded woman who had always supported my work, but her voice carried an unusual tension when she asked me to meet with her privately. "Rachel, I need to ask you about some concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding your inheritance situation," she said when I arrived at her office. "I've received several calls from community members expressing worry about your involvement with valuable family heirlooms." My stomach dropped. "What kind of concerns?" "People are questioning whether it's appropriate for someone in your position to be wearing extremely valuable jewelry to work. There are suggestions that you might not fully understand the responsibilities that come with such an inheritance." "Janet, the jewelry legally belongs to me. My grandmother left it to me specifically because she trusted me to care for it properly. I'm not questioning the legality, Rachel. But perception matters in a small community like Cedar Falls. Some people are saying that your behavior since the inheritance has been different, more attention-seeking." Patricia's fingerprints were all over this conversation. She had managed to transform my growing confidence into evidence of inappropriate behavior, my willingness to wear Eleanor's jewelry into attention-seeking display. "Are you asking me to stop wearing my inheritance to work?" "I'm asking you to consider whether some of your choices might be creating unnecessary controversy. The community center depends on donations from longtime Cedar Falls families, and we can't afford to alienate our supporters." The threat was politely delivered, but unmistakable. If I continued to defy Patricia's expectations about proper behavior, my job could be at risk. The woman who had spent years building a reputation as a reliable, accommodating employee was now being painted as difficult and inappropriate. That evening, I sat in our living room with the museum exhibition catalog proofs spread across the coffee table. The photographs of Eleanor's jewelry were stunning, each piece photographed against museum-quality backgrounds that highlighted both their beauty and their historical significance. The accompanying text, which I had helped research and write, told the stories of 3 generations of women who had treasured these pieces for their emotional rather than monetary value. David found me there when he came home from work, but instead of showing interest in the exhibition materials, he seemed agitated and uncomfortable. "Rachel, we need to talk," he said, sitting across from me with the careful distance he had maintained for weeks. "I had lunch with Mom today, and she's really upset about how things have developed." "I'm sure she is." She showed me some of the letters to the editor that have been submitted to the Cedar Falls Gazette about the museum exhibition. People are taking sides, and it's becoming a community controversy. I looked up from the catalog proofs. "What kind of letters?" "Some supporting your right to make decisions about your inheritance, others questioning whether private family matters should be displayed publicly. The whole town is talking about it. And I think maybe we should consider whether this exhibition is worth the conflict it's creating." There it was. David's true position finally stated clearly. Faced with community pressure and his mother's distress, he wanted me to withdraw from the museum exhibition to restore peace. David, this exhibition honors Eleanor's memory and shares important historical information with the public. The conflict isn't being created by the exhibition itself, but by people who can't accept Eleanor's decision to leave her jewelry to me. But you could end the conflict by postponing the exhibition until things calm down. Things will never calm down as long as your mother believes she can pressure me into giving up my inheritance. This isn't about the exhibition, David. This is about whether I have the right to make decisions about my own property. David ran his hands through his hair in the gesture I knew meant he was feeling trapped between competing loyalties. What if you're wrong? What if this publicity damages your reputation permanently? What if it affects your job or our standing in the community? Then I'll deal with those consequences, but I won't be bullied into hiding away because other people disapprove of my choices. Rachel, I don't know how to support you in this. Every time I try to find middle ground, you push further away from compromise. There is no middle ground when it comes to my legal rights, David. Either you support my right to make decisions about my inheritance, or you side with people who think those decisions should be made for me. The conversation ended without resolution, but David's position was clear. When forced to choose between supporting his wife's independence and maintaining peace with his family and community, he consistently chose peace. The man I had married was conflict-averse by nature, and my transformation into someone willing to fight for her rights was fundamentally incompatible with his need for harmony. The museum exhibition opened on a crisp Saturday morning in October, exactly 6 months after Eleanor's death. Dr. Ashford had created a beautiful display that honored both the jewelry's craftsmanship and its historical significance. Each piece was accompanied by detailed information about its provenance and the women who had owned it, along with excerpts from Eleanor's meticulous research notes. The centerpiece of the exhibition was the emerald necklace, displayed in a custom case that allowed visitors to see it from multiple angles. The accompanying text told the story of Margaret Pemberton, the original owner who had used her wealth to fund charitable organizations and social reform efforts in early 20th century Minnesota. Eleanor's research had uncovered Margaret's involvement in women's suffrage activities and her support for education initiatives that benefited working-class families. I arrived early for the opening reception, wearing a simple black dress that I had chosen specifically to avoid competing with the exhibited jewelry. Dr. Ashford greeted me with genuine warmth, introducing me to several distinguished guests, including the museum director and a visiting curator from the Smithsonian Institution. Mrs. Hartwell has been instrumental in developing this exhibition, Dr. Ashford explained to the group. Her grandmother's research forms the foundation of everything you'll see today, and Rachel's own contributions have been invaluable. The Smithsonian curator, a distinguished woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, spent considerable time examining Eleanor's documentation and asking detailed questions about my plans for the collection's future. This level of historical documentation is extremely rare for privately held collections, she told me. Your grandmother was essentially creating a scholarly resource without realizing it. Have you considered contributing to academic research about jewelry as social history? The suggestion opened possibilities I had never imagined. Not only was Eleanor's collection worthy of public exhibition, but her research could contribute to broader scholarly understanding of how women had used jewelry to navigate social and economic challenges throughout history. The reception attracted a diverse crowd that reflected the community controversy surrounding the exhibition. Many attendees were genuinely interested in the historical and artistic aspects of the display, asking thoughtful questions about the pieces and their provenance. Others seemed more interested in seeing me personally, perhaps hoping to witness drama or gauge my reaction to the ongoing community debate. Nicole arrived early in the reception, bringing her teenage daughter who was studying art history in high school. Rachel, this is incredible, she said, examining the display cases with obvious admiration. Eleanor would be so proud to see her collection presented this way. I keep wishing she could be here to see people's reactions to her research, I replied, watching visitors read the detailed historical information accompanying each piece. She is here, Nicole said simply. This exhibition is her voice being heard by people who never knew her. That's exactly the kind of legacy she would have wanted. Judge Morrison attended with his wife, spending considerable time reading the historical documentation and asking informed questions about Eleanor's research methods. His presence lent credibility to the exhibition and helped counteract some of the criticism that had been circulating in social circles. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he told me near the end of the reception. "This exhibition proves that her decision to leave the collection to you was absolutely correct. You've honored her memory and her scholarship beautifully." The most difficult moment came when David arrived halfway through the reception, accompanied by his sister Stephanie, but notably without Patricia. He moved through the exhibition quietly, reading the wall text and examining the jewelry displays with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. When he finally approached me near the emerald necklace display, his first words were unexpected. "I had no idea Eleanor had done so much research," he said, gesturing toward the comprehensive historical timeline that accompanied the centerpiece display. "This is like a scholarly dissertation about jewelry as social history. Eleanor spent years documenting everything. She saw herself as a custodian of these women's stories, not just their jewelry." David studied the emerald necklace through its protective glass, the stones catching the museum's carefully calibrated lighting. "I'm beginning to understand why she chose you to continue that work." The admission surprised me, representing the first time David had acknowledged that Eleanor's decision might have been based on genuine insight rather than favoritism or confusion. "Does that mean you support the exhibition?" "It means I'm starting to understand that this was never really about the jewelry itself. It was about preserving something important that would have been lost if the collection had gone to someone who only saw dollar signs." Before I could respond to this breakthrough moment, Stephanie appeared at David's elbow with the tense expression she wore when delivering unwelcome news. "David, Mom's outside in the parking lot. She says she wants to see the exhibition, but she's afraid of creating a scene." The mention of Patricia sent a ripple of tension through our small group. I could see David calculating the potential for conflict and weighing his options. "Tell her she's welcome to view the exhibition like any other member of the public," I said, surprising myself with my calm tone. "But if she's here to cause problems, security can escort her out." Quote, "Rachel?" David started, but I held up a hand to stop him. "No, David, I'm not going to be intimidated by your mother's presence or absence. This exhibition honors Eleanor's memory and scholarship. If Patricia wants to see it, she can behave appropriately or leave." Stephanie looked uncertain, clearly not having expected such a direct response. "I'll tell her what you said." 10 minutes later, Patricia entered the museum with the careful composure of someone who knew she was being watched. She was dressed impeccably, as always, but her usual confident bearing seemed strained. Several people in the reception area turned to watch her approach the exhibition displays, sensing the drama that might unfold. I continued my conversations with other guests, determined not to let Patricia's presence dominate the event. But I was acutely aware of her movement through the exhibition space, the way she paused at certain displays and the expression on her face as she read the historical information. The confrontation I had been expecting came when Patricia approached the emerald necklace display where I was standing with Dr. Chen from the Smithsonian. She studied the centerpiece case for several minutes, reading the detailed description of Margaret Pemberton's social reform work and Eleanor's research into the necklace's history. "It's quite beautiful," Patricia said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "Eleanor always did have exquisite taste. The historical documentation is what makes this display so special." Dr. Chen interjected, apparently unaware of the family dynamics at play. Mrs. Hartwell's grandmother was essentially creating archival quality research without formal training. "It's really quite remarkable." Patricia's smile became slightly strained. "Yes, Eleanor was always very thorough about record keeping." "Are you a family member?" Dr. Chen asked politely. "I'm Rachel's mother-in-law," Patricia replied, and I could hear the careful emphasis she placed on the relationship designation. "How wonderful that the family supports sharing this collection publicly. So often, privately held pieces disappear into storage and are never seen again." "Well," Patricia said, her voice carrying just enough edge to suggest disagreement, "there are certainly different perspectives on the appropriate way to handle valuable family heirlooms." Dr. Chen looked confused by the subtle tension in Patricia's response, but before she could ask for clarification, I stepped forward. "Dr. Chen, would you excuse us for a moment? I'd like to speak with my mother-in-law privately." Patricia and I moved to a quieter corner of the exhibition space, near a display case containing Eleanor's pearl necklace and the research documenting its history through 3 generations of ownership. "Patricia, what do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice low but direct. "I wanted to see what all the fuss was about," she replied, gesturing toward the exhibition displays. "I have to admit, the presentation is more professional than I expected. Eleanor's collection deserves professional treatment. That's why she left it to someone who would value its historical significance." "Rachel, I need you to understand something. This exhibition isn't just about jewelry or history. It's about family relationships and community standing. Your public defiance of family expectations has created problems that extend beyond our personal disagreements." "My public assertion of my legal rights, you mean? Call it whatever you want. The result is the same. You've created a situation where the Hartwell family name is associated with controversy and conflict." I looked at Patricia standing in front of Eleanor's pearl necklace display, surrounded by the careful documentation of its journey through generations of women who had treasured it for its emotional significance rather than its monetary value. "Patricia, Eleanor left me this collection because she trusted me to preserve these stories and honor the women who had owned these pieces before her. This exhibition does exactly that. If you see controversy and conflict instead of historical preservation and public education, that says more about your priorities than mine. My priority is family unity. Your priority is control. You can't accept that Eleanor chose me over you, so you're trying to create enough pressure to force me to give up what she wanted me to have." Patricia's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "You're right. I can't accept it. Eleanor was my mother-in-law for 40 years. I helped care for her during her illness. I organized her social life. I managed her household affairs when she could no longer do it herself. And then she left her most valuable possessions to someone who knew her for 6 years." The raw honesty in Patricia's voice revealed the pain underneath her controlling behavior. She genuinely felt betrayed by Eleanor's decision, genuinely believed that her years of practical support should have been rewarded with the jewelry inheritance. "Patricia, Eleanor valued your care and support. But she also saw something in our relationship that was different from what she had with other family members. I listened to her stories about these pieces, asked about the women who had owned them, understood that their value wasn't just monetary. And I didn't? Did you? When you looked at Eleanor's jewelry, did you see Margaret Pemberton's commitment to social reform, or did you see assets that needed proper management? When Eleanor talked about her first mother-in-law's strength and independence, did you ask to hear more stories, or did you calculate insurance values?" Patricia was quiet for a long moment, looking at the pearl necklace display where Eleanor's research documented the piece's journey from a young bride's wedding gift to a widow's comfort during difficult times. "Maybe you're right," she said finally. "Maybe I did focus too much on practical concerns and not enough on sentimental value. But that doesn't change the fact that I loved Eleanor and wanted to honor her memory properly. Then honor it by accepting her choice. Eleanor left me this collection because she believed I would preserve what mattered most to her: the stories, the connections between generations of women, the understanding that true value isn't always measured in dollars. I don't know if I can do that. Then I guess we'll both have to live with the consequences of that decision." Patricia looked around the exhibition space, taking in the respectful attention visitors were paying to Eleanor's collection and research. "I suppose the exhibition is quite educational," she admitted grudgingly. "Eleanor would be proud to see people learning about Margaret Pemberton and the other women who owned these pieces. That's exactly what she hoped would happen someday. Perhaps." Patricia adjusted her purse strap, a gesture I recognized as her way of preparing to leave uncomfortable situations. "Rachel, I may not agree with your decisions, but I can see that you've put considerable effort into honoring Eleanor's memory. It wasn't an apology or a complete acceptance, but it was the closest Patricia had come to acknowledging that my inheritance might be legitimate." As the reception wound down, David approached me near the museum's entrance. Most of the other guests had left, and we found ourselves alone for the first time in weeks. "Rachel, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity I hadn't heard in months. I've been so focused on managing family drama that I lost sight of what really mattered: supporting my wife and honoring my grandmother's memory. What changed your mind? Seeing the exhibition, reading Eleanor's research, understanding that this was never about jewelry at all. Eleanor left you her collection because she knew you would do exactly what you've done: preserve the stories and share them with people who could appreciate their significance. And us? What happens to our marriage? David was quiet for a moment, considering his response carefully. I think we have some work to do. I need to learn how to support your independence instead of trying to manage it. And you need to decide whether you can forgive me for taking so long to understand what Eleanor saw in you. I never doubted that Eleanor made the right choice, I said, adjusting the simple pearl earrings I had chosen to wear for the opening. But I did doubt whether I was strong enough to honor her trust. This exhibition proved to me that I am. 6 months later, I received a letter that would change my life in ways I never could have anticipated. The Smithsonian Institution was offering me a position as a research associate specializing in jewelry as social history, based on the scholarly work I had done with Eleanor's collection and the success of the Minneapolis Institute exhibition. The offer came with a substantial salary increase, opportunities for graduate study, and the chance to work with collections from around the world. More importantly, it represented validation that Eleanor's faith in my capabilities had been justified. David and I had spent the intervening months in marriage counseling, working to rebuild trust and establish new patterns of communication. He had gradually learned to celebrate my achievements rather than see them as problems to be managed, while I had worked to include him in my decision-making process rather than shutting him out completely. When I showed him the Smithsonian letter, his reaction was immediate and unqualified support. You have to take it, he said, reading the offer details with growing excitement. Rachel, this is an incredible opportunity. Eleanor would be thrilled to know that her collection opened doors like this for you. It would mean moving to Washington, leaving Cedar Falls, leaving your family, starting over in a new city. Then we'll start over, together. Your career and your happiness are more important than my convenience or my family's expectations. 3 months later, we packed Eleanor's jewelry collection carefully for the move to Washington, where it would continue to serve as the foundation for my research into women's social history. The emerald necklace traveled in a special conservation case, ready to be studied by Smithsonian scholars and eventually displayed in exhibitions that would reach millions of visitors. On our last evening in Cedar Falls, I sat in our empty bedroom holding the mahogany jewelry box that had started this entire journey. Eleanor's gift had been so much more than beautiful jewelry or valuable assets. She had given me the tools I needed to discover my own strength, the motivation to stand up for myself, and ultimately, the confidence to pursue opportunities I had never imagined possible. Patricia and I had reached a détente that fell short of warm friendship but allowed for civil family interactions. She attended our farewell dinner and even complimented my handling of the museum exhibition, though she never fully acknowledged that Eleanor's decision had been the right one. I hope Washington appreciates what they're getting, she said as we prepared to leave. Eleanor always said you were special, even if it took the rest of us longer to see it. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was progress. More importantly, I no longer needed Patricia's approval to feel confident about my worth or my choices. As David loaded the last boxes into our moving truck, I took one final walk through Eleanor's old Victorian house, which had been sold to a young family who promised to restore its original charm. Standing in the bedroom where I had spent so many afternoons listening to Eleanor's stories, I whispered a thank you to the woman who had seen potential in me that I hadn't recognized in myself. Eleanor had left me more than jewelry. She had left me a legacy of strength, the courage to claim what was rightfully mine, and the understanding that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the expectation that they will rise to meet our faith in them. The emerald necklace now sits in my office at the Smithsonian, a daily reminder of the journey that brought me here. When younger women visit and ask about pursuing careers in museum work or historical research, I tell them Eleanor's story and my own. I explain that sometimes the most important inheritance isn't money or property, but the belief that you are capable of more than you realize. Eleanor had been right about everything. I was stronger than I knew, I did have the courage to stand up for myself, and I was worthy of the trust she had placed in me. Her jewelry collection opened doors I had never imagined walking through. But more importantly, it taught me that a woman's worth isn't negotiable, and that sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to accept less than you deserve. The woman who had inherited that jewelry box 18 months ago had been afraid of conflict, eager to please, and willing to sacrifice her own needs for the sake of family harmony. The woman I became understood that some things are worth fighting for, and that real love means supporting someone's growth even when it creates complications. Eleanor's legacy lives on not just in the museum exhibitions and scholarly research her collection has inspired, but in the confidence and independence she helped me claim. Every time I wear her emeralds to an important meeting or scholarly conference, I carry with me the strength of all the women who wore them before me, and the responsibility to pass that strength on to the women who will come after. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.